Close your eyes. Take a deep breath. Let the hum of your air conditioning fade away, the glow of your phone screen dim, and imagine yourself drifting back through time. Past the skyscrapers and the highways. Past the world wars and the Industrial Revolution. Back to a land of endless horizon, of dust and distance, of survival and struggle. You're about to wake up in the American Wild West, somewhere between 1865 and 1895. And I'm sorry to tell you this, but you're probably not going to make it. This isn't because you're not smart. It's not because you're not brave. It's because the world you're about to enter operates on rules so fundamentally different from everything you've ever known that your modern instincts, the very things that keep you alive today, might be the things that kill you tomorrow. So settle in, get comfortable, and let me tell you exactly why. You open your eyes to a ceiling you don't recognize. Rough wooden beams. A thin shaft of light cutting through a gap in the boards above. The air smells different. Smoke, animal, earth, and something else. Something you can't quite place because you've never smelled it before. It's the absence of chemicals. No laundry detergent. No air freshener. No car exhaust drifting in from outside. Your back aches. You're lying on something that might generously be called a mattress, but it feels like a burlap sack stuffed with corn husks, because that's exactly what it is. Welcome to frontier bedding. You sit up, and the first problem presents itself immediately. You're cold. Genuinely cold. Not the kind of cold you fix by adjusting the thermostat. The kind of cold that has seeped into your bones overnight because the fire in the small iron stove across the room died hours ago, and nobody woke up to feed it. Let's pause here for a moment. Because this simple fact of waking up cold represents your first brush with a reality that will define every moment of your Wild West experience. Nothing happens automatically. In your life, in the world you came from, warmth happens. Light happens. Water happens. You flip a switch, you turn a handle, you press a button. But here, warmth requires wood. Wood requires chopping. Chopping requires an axe, and skill, and time, and calories. And those calories require food. And that food requires hunting, or farming, or money. And that money requires work. Everything is a chain. And every link in that chain is something you have to do yourself, with your own hands, with knowledge you don't have. But you don't have time to contemplate this, because you need to use the bathroom. You look around the small room. There's the bed you woke up in. There's the stove. There's a wooden chair, a small table with a ceramic basin on it, and a window with no glass, just wooden shutters, currently closed against the morning chill. No bathroom. No door leading to a bathroom. No indication that a bathroom exists anywhere in this building. Your bladder doesn't care about historical accuracy. It wants relief, and it wants it now. If you're lucky, if you're in a slightly more established town, in a slightly more prosperous dwelling, there might be a chamber pot somewhere. It's exactly what it sounds like, a pot. Under the bed, probably. You use it, and then someone has to empty it. That someone, by the way, is often you. Out the window was a common choice, with a shouted warning of garde-à-l'eau to anyone walking below. If that sounds unsanitary, that's because it absolutely was. But let's say you're staying somewhere with a bit more dignity. Let's say there's an outhouse. You wrap yourself in whatever blanket or coat is available and step outside. The cold hits you like a physical force. It's early morning, the sun just cresting the horizon, painting the dusty street in shades of gold and orange. Beautiful. You might appreciate it more if you weren't desperately searching for the outhouse. You find it. A small wooden structure, 20 yards behind the main building. You open the door and immediately understand why people didn't linger. The smell is extraordinary. Not just bad, architectural. It has layers, depth, history. The structure is essentially a wooden box built over a deep hole in the ground. There's a bench with a hole cut in it. No toilet paper, of course. That won't become common until the 1890s, and even then, it'll be a luxury. Instead, there might be pages torn from an old catalog. If you're very lucky, maybe some corn cobs. I'll let you sit with that image for a moment. You look around the small room. There's the bed you woke up in. There's the stove. There's a wooden chair, a small table with a ceramic basin on it, and a window with no glass, just wooden shutters, currently closed against the morning chill. No bathroom. No door leading to a bathroom. No indication that a bathroom exists anywhere in this building. Your bladder doesn't care about historical accuracy. It wants relief, and it wants it now. If you're lucky, if you're in a slightly more established town, in a slightly more prosperous dwelling, there might be a chamber pot somewhere. It's exactly what it sounds like, a pot. Under the bed, probably. You use it, and then, well, then someone has to empty it. That someone, by the way, is often you. Out the window was a common choice, with a shouted warning of garde-à-leu to anyone walking below. If that sounds unsanitary, that's because it absolutely was. But let's say you're staying somewhere with a bit more dignity. Let's say there's an outhouse. You wrap yourself in whatever blanket or coat is available and step outside. The cold hits you like a physical force. It's early morning, the sun just cresting the horizon, painting the dusty street in shades of gold and orange. Beautiful. You might appreciate it more if you weren't desperately searching for the outhouse. You find it. A small wooden structure, 20 yards behind the main building. You open the door and immediately understand why people didn't linger. The smell is extraordinary. Not just bad, architectural. It has layers, depth, history. The structure is essentially a wooden box built over a deep hole in the ground. There's a bench with a hole cut in it. No toilet paper, of course. That won't become common until the 1890s, and even then, it'll be a luxury. Instead, there might be pages torn from an old catalog. If you're very lucky, maybe some corn cobs. I'll let you sit with that image for a moment. You look around the small room. There's the bed you woke up in. There's the stove. There's a wooden chair, a small table with a ceramic basin on it, and a window with no glass. Just wooden shutters, currently closed against the morning chill. No bathroom. No door leading to a bathroom. No indication that a bathroom exists anywhere in this building. Your bladder doesn't care about historical accuracy. It wants relief, and it wants it now. If you're lucky, if you're in a slightly more established town, in a slightly more prosperous dwelling, there might be a chamber pot somewhere. It's exactly what it sounds like, a pot. Under the bed, probably. You use it, and then, well, then someone has to empty it. That someone, by the way, is often you. Out the window was a common choice, with a shouted warning of garde-à-leu to anyone walking below. If that sounds unsanitary, that's because it absolutely was. But let's say you're staying somewhere with a bit more dignity. Let's say there's an outhouse. You wrap yourself in whatever blanket or coat is available and step outside. The cold hits you like a physical force. It's early morning, the sun just cresting the horizon, painting the dusty street in shades of gold and orange. Beautiful. You might appreciate it more if you weren't desperately searching for the outhouse. You find it. A small wooden structure, 20 yards behind the main building. You open the door and immediately understand why people didn't linger. The smell is extraordinary. Not just bad, architectural. It has layers, depth, history. The structure is essentially a wooden box built over a deep hole in the ground. There's a bench with a hole cut in it. No toilet paper, of course. That won't become common until the 1890s, and even then, it'll be a luxury. Instead, there might be pages torn from an old catalog. If you're very lucky, maybe some corn cobs. I'll let you sit with that image for a moment. You find the well in the center of town, a simple wooden structure with a hand crank. You lower the bucket, bring it back up, and stare at the water inside. It looks clear enough. It smells okay. You drink. You hope. And now you're hungry. Your stomach growls. In your world, this would be a minor inconvenience solved by walking to the kitchen, opening the refrigerator, perhaps putting something in the microwave. 4 minutes later, food. Hot, safe, plentiful food. Here, the refrigerator hasn't been invented yet. The microwave is more than a century away. And the kitchen, if this small room even has one, is a cast iron stove that requires wood, fire starting skills, and time. Let's say you have some food available. Let's be generous and assume whoever owns this dwelling left some provisions. What would you find? Possibly some salt pork or bacon, meat preserved in salt because there's no other way to keep it from spoiling. Hardtack, a type of cracker so dry and durable it could survive years without going bad, weevils permitting. Maybe some beans. Maybe some coffee. If you're very lucky, and it's the right season, some eggs. Now cook it. Do you know how to start a fire in a cast iron stove? Do you know how much wood to use, how to arrange it, how to get the temperature right? Too little heat, and your food won't cook. Too much, and you'll burn it. And in a world where every meal is hard-won, burning food isn't an inconvenience. It's a small catastrophe. Let's say you manage. Let's say you get a fire going. You cook something edible. You eat. Congratulations. You've accomplished what people in the Wild West did every single day, multiple times a day, without thinking about it as an achievement. But you had to think about it. You had to figure it out. And that mental energy, that constant problem solving for tasks that should be automatic, that's exhausting. And you've been awake for maybe an hour. You look down at yourself. Whatever you arrived in, let's say your normal clothes from the 21st century, is going to cause problems. First, the practical issues. Modern clothing is designed for climate-controlled environments. Your t-shirt and jeans might seem rugged, but they're not designed for a world without washing machines, without indoor heating, without the ability to change outfits multiple times a week. But the bigger issue is social. Clothing in the Wild West wasn't just about covering your body. It was information. It told people who you were, what you did, where you came from, and whether you could be trusted. A cowboy's boots weren't just boots. They were tools designed for riding, with high heels that kept feet in stirrups and pointed toes that slipped easily into them. A farmer wore different boots, designed for walking. A townsperson wore different clothes than a rancher. A woman in pants would cause a scandal. A man without a hat would seem strange, almost unfinished. And here you are, dressed in fabrics that don't exist yet, in styles that haven't been invented, with logos and designs that mean nothing to anyone. People will stare. People will ask questions. And in a world where strangers were viewed with suspicion, where a new face in town might be a criminal, a confidence man, or trouble of some kind, standing out is dangerous. You need different clothes. But clothes cost money. And you don't have any. Well, you might have money. But it's the wrong money. Your credit cards are plastic rectangles with no meaning. Your paper bills feature designs that won't exist for another century. Even if you have coins, they're the wrong coins, made of the wrong metals, from the wrong mints. You have nothing of value. You are, in the most literal sense, starting from zero. Let's pause here and talk about what money meant in the Wild West, because it's going to matter a great deal for your survival. The economy of the frontier was a patchwork. In some places, gold and silver coins were common, Spanish pieces of 8, American dollars, whatever was available. In other places, especially remote areas, money barely existed. People bartered. A chicken for some flour. A day's labor for a meal and a place to sleep. Skills and goods traded directly, without currency as an intermediary. Even where money did exist, the amounts were different than anything you're used to. A cowboy might earn $25 to $40 a month. A meal might cost 15 to 25 cents. A night in a hotel, if you could call it that, maybe 50 cents to $1. A horse, a good one, might cost $50. A Colt revolver, about $17. But you have none of that. And more importantly, you have no way to earn it. Think about your skills. Your real skills, the ones you use to make a living in your own time. Do you work with computers? There are no computers. Do you work in an office? There are almost no offices, and the ones that exist need skills you don't have. Handwriting that follows specific styles, arithmetic done by hand, knowledge of laws and customs you've never heard of. Can you ride a horse? Not well enough to work as a cowboy. Can you farm? Not without months of learning, and even then, you'd be starting from scratch without land, without equipment, without seeds. Can you mine? Maybe, but mining is backbreaking work that requires knowledge of geology, engineering, and specific techniques that differ depending on what you're mining and where. What can you do? What do you have that anyone here would want? The answer, unfortunately, might be nothing. And that realization, that all your education, all your experience, all the things that make you valuable in your own world are worthless here. That's the moment when survival starts to feel genuinely uncertain. The sun is fully up now. The town is waking around you. You hear voices, footsteps, the creak of wagon wheels, the whinny of horses. People are starting their days, doing the things they've done 1,000 times before, things that come to them as naturally as breathing. And you're standing in the middle of it, trying to figure out what happens next. Close your eyes. Take a breath. Rest for a moment. Because when we continue, things are going to get harder. You step off the wooden boardwalk and into the street. Immediately, your feet sink slightly into a mixture of dust, dirt, and things you'd rather not think about. The street isn't paved. It's just ground. Ground that horses walk on. Ground that people spit on. Ground that turns to impassable mud when it rains and chokes you with dust when it doesn't. But the ground isn't what's going to hurt you. It's the people. Here's something Hollywood got right. Even if they exaggerated it, the Wild West was violent. But here's what they got wrong. The violence wasn't dramatic. It wasn't choreographed showdowns at high noon with tumbleweeds rolling past. It was sudden, random, and often over before you understood what was happening. Between 1870 and 1885, cattle towns like Dodge City and Abilene had homicide rates that would make modern cities look peaceful. We're talking about rates sometimes 40 or 50 times higher than what you'd experience in a major American city today. And those are just the deaths that were recorded. But the real danger isn't the famous gunfighters. It's everyone else. See that man leaning against the post over there? The one who looks like he's just watching the street. You have no way of knowing that he lost $300 at cards last night, and he's been drinking since dawn. You have no way of knowing that he's looking for someone to take his frustration out on. You have no way of knowing that the wrong look, the wrong word, the wrong anything could end with you bleeding in the street. In your world, violence follows patterns you understand. It happens in certain places, at certain times, for certain reasons. You've learned to read the signals, to avoid the situations, to trust that most people in most places mean you no harm. Here, you can't read anything. The social cues are different. The triggers are different. What seems like a friendly greeting to you might be an insult here. What seems like a normal question might be an intrusion. You don't know the rules, and people don't forgive ignorance. And here's the worst part. There's no one to call. No police force. Not in any way you'd recognize. Some towns have a sheriff, maybe a deputy or two. But they're not patrolling. They're not preventing crime. They're reacting to it, if they react at all. And their justice is rough, quick, and not particularly concerned with your side of the story. You are, for the first time in your life, truly on your own. Speaking of violence, let's talk about guns. Because you've probably noticed them by now. They're everywhere. That man walking past you has a revolver on his hip. So does that one. The woman in the long dress? She might have a Derringer in her purse. The shopkeeper sweeping his porch has a shotgun leaning just inside the door. The kid who can't be more than 14 has a rifle slung over his shoulder. In your world, a gun is an event. It's notable. It's regulated. Here, a gun is a tool, as common and unremarkable as a hammer or a saw. And here's what you need to understand. You don't have one. This is a problem. Not because you need to shoot anyone. Hopefully you won't. But because not having a gun marks you. It says something about you. It says you're either very poor, very new, very foolish, or very confident. And since you're clearly not confident, people will assume one of the other three. More practically, a gun is protection. Not from outlaws. You're unlikely to encounter an actual outlaw, but from everything else. Snakes, wild animals, the occasional aggressive drunk. In a world without emergency services, without hospitals, without any safety net at all, a gun is your last line of defense. But let's say you somehow acquire one. Let's say someone takes pity on you, or you find work and save enough money, or you trade something valuable. Now you have a gun. Can you use it? Not the way you think you can. Shooting a gun in real life is nothing like movies, nothing like video games. A Colt single-action army revolver, the classic cowboy gun, has a kick that will surprise you. It's loud in a way that's physical, that hurts your ears and leaves them ringing. The accuracy is poor beyond short distances, especially for an untrained shooter. And you have 6 shots. That's it. Reloading takes time, skill, and fine motor control that tends to disappear when your hands are shaking with fear. The people around you have been shooting since childhood. They learned on their father's knee, or out of necessity, or through hard experience. They can draw, aim, and fire before you've processed that something is happening. You, with your gun, are not safer. You're just armed. And an armed person who doesn't know what they're doing is a danger mostly to themselves. You've made it halfway down the street. You're being careful. You're watching people, trying to stay out of trouble. You're doing everything right. It won't matter. Because the thing most likely to kill you in the Wild West isn't a bullet. It's something you can't see, can't dodge, can't fight. It's disease. Let's start with the water you drank this morning. Remember how I said it might be fine? It also might be carrying cholera, typhoid fever, or dysentery. These diseases killed thousands of people on the frontier, often sweeping through entire towns in waves. Cholera could take you from healthy to dead in less than a day. Typhoid might give you a few weeks of fever and delirium before it finished you off. Dysentery would leave you too weak to move, losing fluids faster than you could replace them. But it's not just the water. It's everything. See that man coughing into his hand as he walks past? He might have tuberculosis, consumption, they called it then. It was everywhere, spreading through close contact, through shared spaces, through the simple act of breathing the same air. There was no cure. There was barely any treatment. If you caught it, you wasted away over months or years, coughing blood, growing weaker, until your lungs simply gave out. Smallpox still existed. It still killed. Vaccination was available, but not universal. And if you arrived from the future without the scar on your arm that marked a vaccinated person, well, your modern immune system has never encountered smallpox. You have no protection at all. And then there's the everyday infections. A small cut on your hand could become infected. That infection could spread. Without antibiotics, without antiseptics, without any understanding of how to stop bacterial growth, that small cut could kill you. People died from infected blisters, from tooth abscesses, from splinters that went septic. You've spent your entire life protected by an invisible fortress of modern medicine. Vaccines you received as a child. Antibiotics you took without thinking about it. Clean water, pasteurized food, sterile medical equipment. All of it gone now. Your body is a garden that's never been exposed to these particular weeds. And they will find you. Let's say you do get sick. Or injured. Let's say you twist your ankle stepping off that boardwalk. Or you cut yourself on a rusty nail. Or you wake up tomorrow with a fever. What happens next? If the town is large enough, there might be a doctor. I use that term loosely. Medical education in the Wild West was variable. Some doctors had genuine training from reputable schools back east. Others had learned by apprenticeship, watching another doctor work and picking up what they could. Still others had simply decided to call themselves doctors because the frontier didn't have licensing boards. The doctor's tools would make you nervous. His understanding of what's wrong with you would make you more nervous. In the 1870s and 1880s, germ theory was just becoming accepted. Many doctors still believed in miasma, the idea that bad air caused disease. They might bleed you to release toxins. They might prescribe mercury or arsenic, common medicines of the era that were as likely to poison you as cure you. Surgery was possible, but anesthesia was primitive, chloroform or ether, administered by guess and by God. If you needed something amputated, and many things were amputated that wouldn't be today, you'd be held down by assistants while the doctor worked as fast as possible. Speed was the surgeon's greatest skill, because the longer the operation, the more likely you were to die of shock. And let's talk about that word, amputation. In your world, a broken leg is a serious injury. Here, it might cost you the leg, or your life. A compound fracture, where the bone breaks the skin, was often a death sentence. Infection was almost inevitable, and once infection set in, the only option was to cut. Dentistry was worse. Toothaches were treated with extraction, performed by whoever was available, sometimes the blacksmith, whose tools and strong hands made him a natural choice. There was whiskey for the pain, if you were lucky. There was nothing for the infection that might follow. You have lived your entire life with the assumption that medical help is available, that if something goes wrong with your body, someone can fix it. That assumption is a luxury you no longer have. You've been outside for a while now. Let's talk about the weather. If you've arrived in summer, particularly in the desert Southwest, the heat is unlike anything you've prepared for. We're talking temperatures that can exceed 110 degrees. And you can't escape it. There's no air conditioning. There's no refrigeration. There's no cool glass of ice water, because ice is a luxury item transported from distant mountains at enormous expense. The best you can do is find shade, drink water, and wait for evening. But the heat does something else. It accelerates everything bad. Food spoils faster. Water sources dry up. Tempers fray. The violence we talked about earlier? It spikes in the summer months. People are uncomfortable, irritable, pushed to their limits by the relentless sun. And if you've arrived in winter, particularly in the northern territories, the cold is equally merciless. Temperatures can drop to 30 or 40 below zero. Blizzards can trap you for days, weeks. Frostbite takes fingers and toes with casual efficiency. You don't have proper clothing for either extreme. Your modern fabrics, designed for climate-controlled environments, will fail you. In the heat, You'll dehydrate faster than you expect. In the cold, you'll lose body heat through materials that aren't designed to retain it. The people who live here have adapted. They know to rest during the hottest hours. They know to layer clothing in specific ways. They know the signs of heat exhaustion and hypothermia because they've seen both kill. You know none of this. Your body has been pampered by thermostats and insulation. And the frontier doesn't care about your comfort. One more thing before we let you rest. The wildlife. You're not at the top of the food chain here. You're not even close. In the Southwest, there are rattlesnakes. They don't want to bite you. They'd rather be left alone. But you don't know where they hide. You don't know the sound of their warning rattle, and you're walking through their territory in shoes that offer no protection. A rattlesnake bite without antivenom is survivable, but only barely, and only if you're lucky. The pain is extraordinary. The tissue damage is permanent. There are scorpions, black widows, brown recluses, creatures that hide in boots and bedding that you wouldn't think to check for, that the locals shake out automatically every morning. In the northern regions, there are bears, grizzlies that can outrun you, outclimb you, and end you with a single swipe. There are mountain lions that hunt by ambush, that you'll never see until it's too late. And everywhere, there are the smaller threats. Mosquitoes carrying malaria. Yes, malaria existed in America then. Ticks carrying diseases that won't be identified for another century. Fleas that spread plague from the prairie dogs to you. The land itself is hostile. It's beautiful, yes, achingly, impossibly beautiful, but it was not designed for your comfort. It was not designed for your survival. It simply exists, indifferent to whether you live or die. And you're standing in the middle of it, soft and unprepared, a creature from another world entirely. The sun is climbing higher now. The morning cool has burned away, and you're starting to feel the heat. Your throat is dry again. Your feet hurt. Your mind is spinning with everything you've learned, everything you need to watch for, everything that could go wrong. Close your eyes. Let the sounds of the town fade into the background. The distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the murmur of voices, the creak of wagon wheels. Rest now. Breathe slowly. Because when we continue, we're going to talk about how you might actually survive this. The work you could do. The people you might meet. The small, desperate chances you have to make it through. Sleep well. The frontier will be waiting. Welcome back, weary traveler. The sun has climbed to its peak now, beating down on the dusty streets, driving sensible people into the shade. You've learned about the dangers, the violence, the disease, the creatures, the elements. You understand now that this world wants to kill you in 100 different ways. But you're still here, still breathing, still standing. And that means you need to figure out how to keep it that way. You need work. You need money. You need a place in this society that doesn't yet know what to make of you. Settle in. Let your breathing slow. And let me tell you about the brutal economics of frontier survival. By the time they were hired for drives, they'd been riding for a decade or more. You're starting at zero, and nobody's going to pay you to learn. If not a cowboy, then what? There's mining. The gold rushes are mostly over by the time period we're in, but silver mining is booming in places like Nevada and Colorado. Copper too. Men pour into mining towns hoping to strike it rich, hoping to find that one vein that changes everything. They almost never do. What they find instead is backbreaking labor in the dark. Mines were death traps, cave-ins, explosions from unstable dynamite, toxic gases that accumulated in poorly ventilated shafts. Miners developed lung diseases from breathing rock dust day after day. They worked by candlelight, hunched in tunnels so narrow they couldn't stand upright. And the pay wasn't much better than cowboying. $3 or $4 a day if you were lucky, and most of that went right back to the mining company for equipment, housing, and food sold at inflated prices in company stores. There's farming. Homesteaders were pouring onto the Great Plains, claiming their 160 acres under the Homestead Act. Free land, imagine that. All you had to do was improve it, live on it for 5 years, and it was yours. Except the land wasn't free. Not really. You needed equipment, a plow, a wagon, tools. You needed seed. You needed animals. You needed lumber for a house, or you'd be living in a sod dugout carved into the earth like a burrow. You needed money to survive until your first crop came in, and even then, that crop might fail. Drought, locusts, prairie fires, hailstorms that destroyed in minutes what took months to grow. Half of all homesteaders failed. They gave up, walked away, lost everything. The ones who succeeded were tougher than you can imagine and luckier than they'd ever admit. There's always labor. Simple, unskilled work. Hauling, digging, loading, unloading. The frontier always needed strong backs, and if you were willing to work yourself to exhaustion for 50 cents a day, someone would probably hire you. But that kind of work destroys bodies. Without proper nutrition, without rest, without any of the worker protections you take for granted, you'd wear out fast. Men aged decades and years. They broke down, used up, discarded when they couldn't work anymore. This is the reality of frontier economics. Everyone is desperate, and desperation drives wages down. There's always someone hungrier than you, someone willing to work longer for less. And if you can't compete, you don't eat. Let's say you find work. Let's say you're hauling freight or mucking stables or doing whatever desperate task earns you enough to survive. You're at the bottom of society, but at least you're surviving. Now let's talk about who's above you. Because the Wild West had a hierarchy, even if it pretended not to. At the top were the ranchers and the mine owners. Men who'd arrived early, claimed the best land, built empires of cattle or silver or both. They lived in houses that would seem modest by your standards, but were palaces out here. They had influence, power, and the law on their side. When they wanted something, they usually got it. Below them were the merchants and professionals. Shopkeepers, doctors, lawyers, bankers. These were the respectable people, the ones who built churches and schools, who gave the rough towns a veneer of civilization. They had money, stability, and social standing. Below them were the skilled workers. Blacksmiths, carpenters, gunsmiths. Men with trades, with knowledge that couldn't be easily replaced. They earned decent wages and commanded respect. And below them, everyone else. Cowboys, miners, laborers, drifters. The vast mass of people who owned nothing, who lived paycheck to paycheck, or in this case, payday to payday, and who were one injury or illness away from complete destitution. That's where you are. At the bottom. And climbing is almost impossible. The ranchers got their land decades ago. The merchants had capital to start their businesses, money from family back east, or savings from years of careful work. The skilled workers learned their trades as apprentices, starting as boys. None of these paths are available to you. Social mobility in the Wild West was a myth, mostly. Oh, there were stories. The prospector who struck gold, the cowboy who saved his wages and bought a ranch. These stories existed precisely because they were rare. They were the exceptions that proved the rule. For every success story, there were thousands of men who worked until they couldn't work anymore and then died with nothing. You, with no connections, no capital, no skills that matter here, are unlikely to be an exception. Here's something nobody talks about when they romanticize the Wild West: the loneliness. You are far from home, farther than you can comprehend. The people you love, the places you know, the entire world that made sense to you, all of it is gone. Not just miles away, but years away, centuries away, unreachable. And the people around you? They're strangers. Strangers with different values, different assumptions, different ways of seeing the world. They use words you don't understand, reference events you've never heard of, share jokes that make no sense to you. You can't explain where you're from. You can't talk about your life, your experiences, your memories. Everything that makes you you is unspeakable here. You're a ghost wearing a person's body, moving through a world where nothing is familiar. The frontier attracted lonely people, men who'd left everything behind, families, failures, pasts they wanted to forget. They came west to start over, to become someone new. But starting over is harder than it sounds. The isolation wore on them. The emptiness of the landscape echoed the emptiness they felt inside. Suicide rates on the frontier were high. Alcoholism was epidemic. Men drank to forget, to feel something, to fill the void. They gambled recklessly because the momentary excitement was better than the endless gray sameness of survival. And you're lonelier than any of them. At least they chose to be here. At least they remember a world that still exists somewhere. You have nothing. No hope of return. No letters from home. No possibility that someday, if you save enough money, you could go back. This is your life now. This dusty street. These suspicious strangers. This relentless struggle to survive one more day. And the weight of that realization is heavier than anything you've ever carried. There's a building down the street with lights spilling from its windows even now, in the middle of the day. You can hear piano music, laughter, the clink of glasses. The saloon. Every town has one. Most towns have several. They're the social centers of frontier life, the places where men gather to drink, to gamble, to forget. And right now, the saloon seems impossibly inviting. A place to sit down, a place to be around people, a place where, for a few coins, you could feel something other than fear and exhaustion. This is a trap. The saloon will take everything from you if you let it. The whiskey is cheap and strong and offers a few hours of warmth before dropping you into a deeper cold. The gambling seems like a way to turn your meager earnings into something more, but the games are rigged or close to it, and the men who run them have been separating fools from their money for years. And then there are the women. In some saloons, there are women who offer companionship of various kinds for a price. They're not villains, they're survivors, doing what they must in a world with few options for women. But the diseases they might carry have no cure. Syphilis was rampant on the frontier, and it was a death sentence, just a slow one. It could take decades to kill you, destroying your mind along the way. Men came to the frontier with dreams and left their dreams in saloons. They drank their wages. They gambled their savings. They woke up broke and broken and couldn't remember how it happened. The saloon was always there, always open, always ready to offer comfort that wasn't really comfort at all. You'll feel the pull on the hard days, and they'll all be hard days. You'll want to walk through those swinging doors and make the world go away for a while. That's not weakness. That's human. But every man who ever destroyed himself on the frontier felt that same pull. The trick is to walk past, to keep walking, to find something else to hold on to. The question is, what? Let's pause from your story for a moment and talk about someone who had it even harder. Women. If you're a woman who's found herself in the Wild West, everything I've told you so far applies, plus more. The frontier was built by and for men. Women existed in a strange, in-between space. Essential but invisible, necessary but restricted. Respectable women had narrow options. Marriage, mostly. You could be a wife, a mother, a keeper of the home. You could teach school if you were educated, nurse the sick if you had the stomach for it, take in laundry or sewing for money. But you couldn't own property in many territories. You couldn't vote. You couldn't walk into a saloon or a business meeting. Half the world was closed to you by custom, if not by law. And yet women survived. More than survived, they built the West alongside men, even if the history books forgot to mention them. They ran ranches when their husbands died. They operated boarding houses and restaurants. They worked as journalists, as photographers, as entrepreneurs of every kind. Some women chose less respectable paths. Saloon girls, dance hall women, prostitutes. They existed in every town, tolerated but not accepted, making money in the only ways available to them. Their lives were hard and usually short, but they lived on their own terms as much as anyone could. The toughest women on the frontier were tough in a way that defies description. They gave birth without hospitals, buried children without grief counselors, worked alongside men in fields and mines, and never complained, because complaining wouldn't change anything. If you're a woman in this world, you'll need every ounce of that toughness. And you'll need to learn it fast. The afternoon is wearing on. The shadows are starting to lengthen. You've been in this world for most of a day now, and you're still alive. That's something. That's more than nothing. But the night is coming. And with it, new dangers, new fears, new challenges. Close your eyes now. Let the warmth of the afternoon sun soak into your skin. Feel the weariness in your bones. Rest. When we return, we'll talk about what happens after dark. About the things that come out when the sun goes down. About how to make it through to morning. Rest now. You've earned it. The night will be here soon enough. Welcome back. The sun is sinking now, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson and deep purple. The heat of the day is finally breaking, and a cool breeze is starting to move through the streets. People are finishing their work, closing up their shops, heading home or heading to the saloon. And you're still here, still surviving. But the night is coming, and the night brings its own terrors. Settle in. Let your body relax. And let me tell you about the darkness that's about to swallow the world. The sun drops below the horizon, and the world changes. You've experienced night before, of course. But you haven't experienced this night. Not really. Because every night of your life has been cushioned by artificial light. Street lamps, porch lights, the glow of windows, of screens, of 1,000 electric sources that push back against the dark. Here, there is none of that. The town has a few oil lamps hanging outside businesses. A few windows glow with candlelight or the flicker of kerosene. But between those small islands of illumination, the darkness is absolute. Not dim, not shadowy, absolute. The kind of darkness where you can hold your hand in front of your face and see nothing at all. Your eyes will adjust somewhat. If the moon is out, you'll be able to make out shapes, silhouettes, the general geography of your surroundings. But if it's a new moon, or if clouds cover the sky, you'll be effectively blind. This changes everything. The violence we talked about earlier? It gets worse at night. Crimes happen in darkness because darkness provides cover. The drunk who was merely surly during the day becomes dangerous when he can't be seen clearly. The thief who wouldn't risk robbery in daylight grows bold in shadow. And you can't see it coming. You can't read faces, can't spot trouble brewing, can't see the hand reaching for the gun. Your modern instincts, trained on well-lit streets and security cameras, are useless here. People in this era understood darkness in a way you never have. They planned around it. They stayed inside after sunset unless they had compelling reason to venture out. They carried lanterns when they had to move, and they moved carefully, slowly, aware that every shadow could hide danger. You need to find shelter. You need to find it now, before the last light fades. Because being caught outside, alone, in the dark of a frontier town is not something you want to experience. Where do you sleep tonight? If you have money, and by some miracle, let's say you earned a little today, or you found something to trade, you might afford a room. The word room is generous. What you'll get is a space, possibly shared with strangers, in a building that calls itself a hotel. Frontier hotels range from barely acceptable to genuinely horrifying. In the better establishments, you might get a private room with a bed, a wash basin, and a chamber pot. The mattress will be stuffed with straw or corn husks. The sheets, if there are sheets, may not have been washed since the last guest, or the guest before that. In the worst establishments, and these were common, you'd get a spot in a communal room, rows of beds, or just pallets on the floor, filled with whoever could pay. Snoring, coughing, spitting strangers inches away from you. Men who haven't bathed in weeks. Men who might go through your pockets while you sleep. And the vermin. The bedbugs were legendary. Lice were common. Fleas hopped from guest to guest, spreading whatever they carried. You'd wake up covered in bites, itching, scratching, wondering what diseases were now making their way into your bloodstream. If you can't afford even that, there are other options. Some saloons let men sleep on the floor after closing, for a few cents or for nothing if you'd been drinking. You'd wake up sticky with spilled beer, your back aching from the hard boards, but at least you'd have a roof. Or there's the livery stable. For a nickel, you might be allowed to sleep in the hayloft, surrounded by the warm animal smell of horses. It's not comfortable, but it's not the worst option either. The hay is softer than floorboards, and the horses provide a kind of company. And if you have nothing at all, you find a sheltered spot and hope for the best. An alley, a doorway, the space under a porch. You curl up against the cold and try to sleep with one eye open, knowing that anything could happen before morning. This is your first night in the Wild West. Try to survive it. You've found shelter. Let's say you're in that cheap hotel room, lying on that lumpy mattress, staring at the ceiling and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the night. You're exhausted, but sleep won't come easily. Too much has happened. Too much is wrong. And then you smell smoke. Fire was the great destroyer of frontier towns. It was so common, so devastating, so inevitable that people simply accepted it as part of life. Towns burned. They burned regularly. And when they burned completely. Think about the construction. Everything is wood. The buildings are wood. The boardwalks are wood. The furniture is wood. And everything is dry. Frontier towns were often in arid climates where the timber had been curing in the sun for months or years. Now it opened flames everywhere. Candles, oil lamps, kerosene lanterns, wood-burning stoves, fireplaces, cigarettes and cigars. 1,000 ignition sources in a world made of kindling. A fire could start anywhere. A knocked-over lantern in a saloon. A spark from a stove landing on a dry curtain. A cigarette tossed carelessly into a pile of hay. And once it started, there was almost no way to stop it. Fire departments, where they existed, were volunteer brigades with hand-pumped equipment. They might have a bucket brigade, a line of people passing water from hand to hand. They might have a primitive pump that could throw a thin stream of water a few dozen feet. Against a building fully engulfed, it was nothing. The only real strategy was demolition. Tear down buildings in the fire's path to create a gap it couldn't jump. Sacrifice some structures to save others. It was brutal, desperate, and often too slow. Tombstone burned. Deadwood burned. Virginia City burned multiple times. San Francisco burned 6 times in the early 1850s alone. Each time, people rebuilt. Each time, they knew it would probably happen again. If fire breaks out while you're sleeping, you might not wake up in time. Smoke inhalation kills faster than flames. And even if you do wake, even if you make it outside, you'll watch everything go. The town, your possessions, maybe people you've started to know. Fire doesn't care about your story. It just consumes. Let's talk about the men who operate best when the sun goes down. The Wild West had outlaws. Real ones. Not the romanticized figures of dime novels, but desperate men who had chosen, or been forced into, a life outside the law. They robbed. They killed. They took what they wanted because the alternative was starvation or prison or the noose. Most outlaws weren't famous. They weren't Jesse James or Billy the Kid. They were anonymous, interchangeable, forgotten by history. Men who drifted from town to town, looking for opportunities. Men who might knock you over the head in an alley for the few coins in your pocket. The night was their time. In darkness, they could move unseen. They could wait in shadows outside saloons, watching for drunk men stumbling home with their winnings. They could slip into unlocked buildings, and many buildings weren't locked, because locks were expensive and the concept of security was different then. Stagecoach robbery was common enough to be expected. If you ever traveled between towns, you accepted the risk that armed men might stop the coach and demand valuables. The smart travelers carried a small amount of money to hand over quickly, keeping their real savings hidden. The unlucky ones lost everything. Train robbery became epidemic in the 1870s and 1880s. Gangs would stop trains in remote areas, dynamite the safe cars, and disappear into the wilderness. The railroads eventually hired private security, the Pinkertons and others, but for decades, trains were targets. And in the towns themselves, theft was constant. Horses were stolen. Cattle were rustled. Shops were burgled. Anything of value that wasn't guarded was at risk. People slept with guns under their pillows not because they were paranoid, but because the threat was real. You, in your cheap hotel room or your hayloft or your alley doorway, are a target. You're obviously a stranger. You're obviously vulnerable. You're obviously alone. If someone decides you might have something worth taking, there's very little to stop them. Stay quiet. Stay alert. And hope the night passes without incident. You're lying in the dark, unable to sleep. And you're listening. The night has its own soundtrack, and none of it is familiar. From the saloon down the street, you hear music. A piano, played with more enthusiasm than skill. Laughter, sometimes. Shouting, other times. Occasionally a gunshot, followed by either cheers or screams. You can't tell what's celebration and what's violence. Maybe there's no difference here. From outside, you hear horses. The clip-clop of hooves on hard-packed dirt. The whinny and snort of animals settling for the night. The creak of wagons still moving, even now. You hear dogs barking. There are always dogs in frontier towns, strays and half-ferals that scavenge and hunt and fight. Their barking rises and falls in waves, signaling things you can't interpret. Strangers approaching? Animals in the shadows? Nothing at all. You hear coyotes. If you've never heard a coyote before, the sound is unsettling. High-pitched yips and howls that seem to come from everywhere at once. They're not dangerous to you, probably, but they sound like something from a nightmare. You hear the buildings settling around you. Creaks and groans as the wood contracts in the cooling air. Footsteps in the hallway. Someone coughing, over and over. A muffled argument through a thin wall. And underneath all of it, in the gaps between sounds, you hear silence. A vast, empty silence that the small noises only emphasize. The silence of a world without engines, without electricity, without the constant hum of machinery that fills every moment of your normal life. It's the most profound silence you've ever experienced. And somehow, it's the loudest thing of all. The night brings out more than just outlaws. It brings out fears, some rational, some less so. People on the frontier believe things. Things that seem strange now, but made perfect sense in a world full of unexplained dangers. They believed in ghosts. They believed in curses. They believed that certain places were haunted, certain people were hexed, certain actions would bring terrible luck. Some of this was carried from the old countries. European folklore mixed with Native American beliefs, stirred together in the melting pot of the West. Some of it grew naturally from the environment. When so much of life was uncertain, when death could come so quickly and randomly, people looked for patterns. They found them even where none existed. Miners were famously superstitious. They wouldn't work on certain days. They wouldn't whistle underground. They feared women in the mines, believed they angered the spirits of the earth. These weren't ignorant men. They were workers trying to survive in an extraordinarily dangerous environment, and their superstitions gave them a sense of control where they had almost none. Cowboys had their own beliefs. They wouldn't put a hat on a bed, bad luck. They wouldn't wear yellow, it attracted lightning. They read the behavior of cattle for signs of coming weather, coming trouble, coming death. And everyone feared the things that medicine couldn't explain. Mental illness was demon possession. Epidemics were divine punishment. A child born with a defect was a curse on the family. People looked for reasons, and when science couldn't provide them, they invented their own. Lying there in the dark, you might find yourself wondering, what if there's something to it? What if this world operates on rules you don't understand? What if the darkness hides more than just human threats? It doesn't, of course. Probably. But the night has a way of making doubts grow, of turning shadows into shapes, of finding fears you didn't know you had. 3 in the morning. For in the morning, the hours between midnight and dawn that seem to stretch forever. You've slept a little, maybe. Fitful, interrupted sleep full of strange dreams and sudden wakenings. Every noise jerked you back to consciousness. Every shift in the darkness made your heart race. This is the time when humans are weakest. Your body temperature drops. Your mind plays tricks. The fears that seemed manageable at midnight become overwhelming now. The loneliness, the displacement, the sheer impossibility of your situation, it all crowds in during these dark hours. People die at this time, more than at any other. The old, the sick, the injured, something about these hours seems to tip them over the edge. On the frontier, where so many were old before their time, sick without treatment, injured without care, the hours before dawn claimed more than their share. You think about home. You can't help it. You think about the life you had, the people you knew, the simple pleasures you took for granted. A hot shower, a cold drink, a familiar voice. All of it impossibly distant now. All of it gone. This is the lowest point. The bottom of the night's well. The moment when survival seems least possible and least worthwhile. But here's the thing about the night. It ends. It always ends. The sky is starting to lighten, just barely, at the eastern edge of the horizon. Not sunrise yet, but the promise of it. The stars are fading. The darkness is thinning. The world is taking shape again, edges emerging from shadow. You made it. One night in the Wild West. One night of cold and fear and darkness and uncertainty. And you're still here. The dawn is coming. And with it, another day of survival. The sun is rising. The night is over. You've survived something, not triumph, exactly, but endurance. You've passed through the darkness and come out the other side. Let that warm light wash over you now. Feel the tension leaving your body. Let your breathing slow, your muscles relax, your mind drift. When we return, we'll talk about what a full day looks like. The work, the food, the struggles that fill every waking hour. The small victories and the constant setbacks. The life that people actually lived in the Wild West. But for now, rest in this moment. This thin band of peace between night and day. Sleep now. The dawn will keep watch. Welcome back. The sun has risen fully now, casting long golden shadows across the town. The night is behind you, that first terrible night, and you're still breathing, still standing, still, against all odds, alive. But survival isn't a single achievement. It's not a box you check and move on. It's a continuous process, a relentless demand that fills every hour of every day. Let your body settle. Let your mind drift. And let me walk you through what a full day of frontier life actually looked like. Dawn comes early on the frontier, not because people are virtuous early risers, but because they have no choice. There's no artificial light worth working by, so the day begins when the sun provides illumination and ends when it takes that light away. You're awake by 5, maybe earlier. The roosters have been screaming for an hour already. Every town has roosters, and they have no respect for your exhaustion. The streets are already stirring with people who have work to do. And there is so much work. If you're a laborer, your day might start with feeding and watering animals. Horses need care before they can be used. Oxen need attention. Even the chickens and pigs require time and effort. Animals don't take days off, so neither do you. Then there's water to haul, wood to chop, fires to start, breakfast to prepare. Every task that takes you seconds in your modern life takes minutes or hours here. The simple act of getting ready for the day consumes the first hours of light. By 7 or 8, the real work begins. Whatever job you've managed to find, hauling freight, mucking stables, digging ditches, loading wagons, you'll do it until midday. There might be a break for lunch, maybe 30 minutes, maybe an hour if you're lucky and the boss is generous. Then back to work until sundown. 10 hours, 12 hours, sometimes more. 6 days a week, sometimes 7. There's no weekend as you understand it. Sunday might offer a few hours of rest, especially if the town is religious enough to enforce it. But even then, the animals need feeding and the fires need tending. This is the rhythm. This is the shape of days that stretch into weeks that stretch into months. Monotonous, exhausting, unrelenting. The same tasks, the same struggles, the same bone-deep weariness, over and over again. You've never worked like this. Your body isn't prepared for it. Your mind isn't either. By the end of the first week, if you make it that long, you'll understand why people aged so fast here, why a 40-year-old looked 60, why death at 50 was considered a full life. Let's talk about food. Real frontier food. Not the romanticized campfire meals of movies, but the actual daily diet that kept people alive, barely. Breakfast, if you have it, is simple. Coffee, almost certainly. The frontier ran on coffee. It was bitter, often made from beans that had been roasted weeks or months ago, sometimes stretched with chicory or other substitutes. But it was hot and it had caffeine and it got you moving. With the coffee, maybe some biscuits. Hard, dense, nothing like the fluffy creations you might be imagining. These were survival food, flour, lard, maybe a little salt, baked into something that would keep for days and provide calories. If you were lucky, there might be some bacon or salt pork. The fat was essential, providing energy for the brutal work ahead. Lunch was often whatever you could carry with you. More biscuits, some jerky, dried meat that had the texture of leather and about as much flavor. Maybe some beans, cold from a can if cans were available, or from a pot if you were near a kitchen. Dinner was the main meal, but main is relative. Beans again, probably. Beans were cheap, kept well, and provided protein. They were the foundation of frontier eating. You'd have beans so often you'd dream about them. You'd smell them in your sleep. You'd grow to hate them and eat them anyway because the alternative was hunger. If meat was available, it might be beef, tough, stringy beef from cattle that had walked 1,000 miles to market. It might be pork, preserved in salt. It might be wild game if someone had been hunting. Deer, rabbit, squirrel, whatever could be caught. The meat was cooked until it was safe, which often meant cooked until it was gray and chewy. Vegetables were seasonal and scarce. In summer, there might be some fresh produce, tomatoes, corn, squash. In winter, there was almost nothing green. Scurvy wasn't just a sailor's disease. It appeared on the frontier too, among people who went months without fresh fruits or vegetables. And the water situation we discussed? It affects everything you drink. Milk was dangerous. Unpasteurized, it could carry tuberculosis and other diseases. Juice didn't exist in any practical way. So you drank coffee, you drank whiskey, and you drank water and hoped for the best. This diet will leave you constantly hungry. Not starving, necessarily, but never satisfied. Your body, accustomed to abundant food, to variety, to fresh ingredients, will rebel. You'll lose weight. You'll feel weak. You'll think about food with an obsession that surprises you. Welcome to Frontier Nutrition. In your world, you're never truly alone. Even in solitude, you have your phone. You have the internet. You have the ability to reach out to anyone, anywhere, instantly. Loneliness is a choice, or at least it feels that way. Here, connection is measured in days and weeks. If you want to send a message to someone in another town, you write a letter. You find paper, not always easy, and a pen and ink. You write carefully, because paper is expensive and mistakes can't be deleted. Then you give the letter to someone traveling in the right direction, or you wait for the mail service, which might come through once a week. Maybe less. That letter will take days to arrive. Weeks, if the destination is far. The response will take just as long coming back. A simple exchange of information that would take seconds in your world takes a month here. And that's assuming everything goes well. Letters get lost. Riders get delayed. Storms wash out roads. The person you're writing to might have moved on, and your letter will chase them across the territory, always arriving at the place they just left. The telegraph exists, and it's miraculous by frontier standards. Instant communication across vast distances. But telegraph offices are only in larger towns, and sending a message costs money. It's for emergencies, for business, for news that can't wait. Not for casual conversation. Not for keeping in touch. This means you're isolated in a way that's hard to comprehend. The people you knew before, wherever and whenever that was, are unreachable. The relationships you might form here are limited to whoever happens to be in the same place at the same time. When people leave, they're often gone forever. You might never know what happened to them. Friendships on the frontier were intense because of this. When you found someone you connected with, you held on tight. You knew they might be gone tomorrow, might ride off to the next opportunity and vanish from your life entirely. Every connection was precious because every connection was fragile. And you, stranger from another time, can't even explain why you're alone. Can't talk about the world you came from, the people you miss, the life that was stolen from you. Your isolation has layers that no one here could understand. It wasn't all misery. I should tell you that. Even in the hardest circumstances, humans find ways to experience joy. The frontier had its pleasures, small and hard-won but real. There was music, fiddles and guitars and harmonicas, played around campfires and in saloons and on front porches after the day's work was done. People sang old songs from back east, new songs about the West, songs that had traveled across oceans and adapted to this new land. Music was free, required no special equipment beyond an instrument someone had carried 1,000 miles, and could transform an evening. There was storytelling. In a world without television, without radio, without any recorded entertainment, people entertained each other. Tall tales grew taller with each telling. Adventures were embellished until they became legends. A good storyteller was valued, sought after, welcomed wherever they went. There was community. When neighbors were scarce, they mattered more. A barn raising brought everyone together, dozens of people working side by side, building something in a day that would have taken one family weeks. Afterward, there was food and dancing and the simple pleasure of being around other humans. There were holidays. Christmas on the frontier was modest by your standards, but meaningful by theirs. A special meal, perhaps with some rare treat, sugar candy, an orange that had traveled incredible distances. Small gifts, handmade and personal. The recognition that even in hardship, some days were set apart for celebration. There was nature, and this might be the frontier's greatest gift. The beauty of the landscape was staggering. Vast prairies that seemed to go on forever, mountains that touched the sky, sunsets that painted the world in colors you'd never seen. People who lived here noticed. They wrote about it in letters and diaries, this overwhelming beauty that surrounded their hard lives. In your exhaustion, in your fear, in your struggle to survive, don't forget to look up sometimes. The stars here are brighter than any you've ever seen, unchallenged by light pollution. The silence has a quality that's almost sacred. The world, for all its dangers, is achingly beautiful. These moments won't save you. They won't fill your stomach or protect you from violence or cure the diseases that threaten you. But they might remind you why survival matters. Why people endured all of this, generation after generation, building something from nothing. There is joy here. You just have to survive long enough to find it. You've been careful. You've worked hard. You've avoided the obvious dangers and navigated the social complexities and eaten your beans without complaint. And then something goes wrong. Maybe you step on a rusty nail. It punctures your boot. You're inadequate, wrong for this era boot, and sinks into your foot. It hurts, but you've had worse. You pull it out, maybe wash the wound if water is handy, and keep working. What else can you do? 3 days later, your foot is swollen. Red lines are creeping up your ankle. You have a fever. The wound isn't healing, it's getting worse. Infection has set in. In your world, this is an inconvenience. Antibiotics, a tetanus shot, maybe a few days of rest. Here, it's a crisis. The doctor, if there is one, might recognize the infection. He might try to clean it, to drain it, to cut away the dead tissue. He might pack it with poultices that do nothing at all. He might give you laudanum for the pain, which is just opium in liquid form, and that will help you care less about dying but won't stop it from happening. If the infection spreads, if it becomes gangrene, the options narrow quickly. Amputation might save your life. Might. The surgery itself is dangerous, the risk of further infection high. And even if you survive, you're now missing a foot. Your ability to work, to survive, to function in this world, already precarious, has been crippled. This is what happened to people. All the time. A small injury became a life-altering catastrophe. A minor illness became a death sentence. The margin between okay and destroyed was paper thin, and you could cross it without even realizing. Bad luck was all it took. A stumble, a slip, being in the wrong place at the wrong moment. The frontier didn't forgive mistakes, and it didn't distinguish between carelessness and simple misfortune. The result was the same. You've been lucky so far. Remember that. Every hour you survive is an hour that could have gone differently. Every day you make it through is a day that claimed someone else. The frontier is playing a game with you, and the odds are not in your favor. Time moves differently here. Without the structure of your modern life, the meetings, the schedules, the apps that track your every hour, days blur together. Weeks pass before you realize it. Seasons change, and you've somehow survived another one. Spring brings mud and new growth and cautious hope. The winter's grip loosens, and the world comes back to life. But spring also brings flooding, rivers swelling beyond their banks, washing away roads and bridges, and sometimes entire settlements. It brings disease, as warmer temperatures wake up the insects and bacteria that winter held in check. Summer brings heat and dust and long, long days of work. It brings thunderstorms that appear from nowhere, dropping lightning that starts fires and rain that floods streets in minutes. It brings the highest risk of violence, tempers frayed by discomfort, patience worn thin. Fall brings harvest, if you're farming, and preparation. Firewood must be stockpiled. Food must be preserved. Animals must be slaughtered, their meat salted or smoked for the months ahead. There's a frantic quality to fall, a knowledge that winter is coming and everything depends on being ready. Winter brings cold. We talked about this before, but it bears repeating. Winter on the frontier killed people. Blizzards trapped travelers far from shelter. Temperatures dropped low enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. Supplies ran out, and the next delivery might be weeks away, if it came at all. Each season has its own dangers, its own requirements, its own ways of testing you. And the cycle repeats, year after year, relentless and indifferent to your suffering. People measured their lives by winters survived. He's seen 40 winters, they might say, and that meant something. It meant 40 cycles of this brutal calendar. 40 times facing the cold, the hunger, the isolation. 40 times making it through to spring. How many winters could you survive? One maybe. Maybe. Welcome back, traveler. You've been in this world for a full day now. You've seen the sun rise and set, felt the heat and the cold, tasted the bitter coffee and the endless beans. You've survived things that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours ago. But surviving a day is not the same as surviving a life. The frontier doesn't give out prizes for making it through the first chapter. It just turns the page and presents you with the next one. Now we need to talk about transformation. About the person you'd have to become. About shedding your old self like a snake sheds its skin. Settle in. Breathe deeply. And let me tell you about the long road to becoming someone who belongs here. Before we talk about who you need to become, let's acknowledge who you are. Who you were, in that other life, that other world. You're educated, probably. You can read and write fluently. You understand things, science, history, technology, that would seem like magic here. You have knowledge that no one on the frontier possesses, insights into how the world works that won't be discovered for decades or centuries. None of it matters. Your education prepared you for a world of offices and screens and abstract thinking. It didn't teach you how to butcher an animal or repair a wagon wheel or read the weather in the clouds. The knowledge in your head is like a fortune in a currency no one accepts. You're soft. I don't mean that as an insult. It's just true. Your muscles have never known real labor. Your hands have never grown calluses thick enough to grip a rough rope without bleeding. Your body has been cared for in ways that frontier people couldn't imagine. Medicine when you were sick, abundant food when you were hungry, shelter that required nothing from you but the payment of rent. You're accustomed to comfort, to climate control and cushioned seats and the absence of physical pain, to solving problems by calling someone, by searching the internet, by throwing money at inconveniences until they go away. You're accustomed to safety, to laws that are enforced, to systems that function, to the reasonable expectation that tomorrow will be much like today. All of this, everything that makes you who you are, is a liability now. Your instincts are wrong. Your assumptions are wrong. Your very identity is built on foundations that don't exist here. The person you were cannot survive the Wild West. That person has to die so that someone new can live. If you're going to survive, really survive, not just stumble through day by day, you need to learn. Fast. Start with fire. Not matches and lighters, though those exist here in primitive forms. Start with understanding fire itself. How to build one that will last. How to bank coals overnight so you don't have to start from scratch in the morning. How to cook over open flame without burning everything. How to keep a fire from spreading beyond where you want it. Fire is life on the frontier, and your relationship with it will determine much about your survival. Learn to ride. Really ride. This will take months at minimum, but every day you practice is a day you become less helpless. Find someone willing to teach you. A livery-stable worker, a patient cowboy, anyone. Offer to work for free in exchange for lessons. Swallow your pride, because pride is another luxury you can't afford. Learn basic medicine. Not surgery, not diagnosis, but the simple things that can save your life. How to clean a wound properly. How to set a simple fracture. Which plants can reduce fever, ease pain, fight infection. The frontier had herbal remedies that actually worked. Willow bark tea for pain, which contains the compound we now call aspirin. Honey for wounds, which has genuine antibacterial properties. Knowledge like this can mean the difference between recovery and death. Learn to shoot, not to be a gunfighter. That path leads to an early grave, but to be competent, to be able to hit what you aim at, to handle a weapon safely, to defend yourself if defense becomes necessary. Find someone to teach you. Practice until the motions become automatic. Learn the social rules. This might be the most important skill of all. Learn who to trust and who to avoid. Learn how to read a room, how to defuse tension, how to make yourself invisible when trouble starts. Learn the phrases that mark you as belonging and abandon the phrases that mark you as an outsider. Learn to listen more than you speak, because every word you say reveals how little you understand. These skills won't come easily. They'll come with blisters and bruises and humiliation. They'll come with failures that might cost you dearly. But every skill you acquire is a tool for survival, and you need all the tools you can get. You cannot survive alone. The mythology of the lone frontiersman, the solitary cowboy riding into the sunset, is just that, mythology. Real survival on the frontier required community, cooperation, mutual aid. You need to find your people, and you need to be careful about who those people are. Start by being useful. Whatever work you can do, do it well. Do it without complaint. Do it even when you're exhausted, even when you're sick, even when every fiber of your being wants to quit. Reliability is currency here. A person who shows up and does the work, day after day, earns something that money can't buy: trust. Look for mentors. Somewhere in this town, there's an old-timer who knows everything about survival. Maybe he's a former mountain man, trapping furs in his youth before settling down. Maybe she's a widow who's run a homestead alone for 20 years. These people have knowledge you desperately need, and some of them might be willing to share it. Approach with humility. Ask questions. Listen to the answers. Don't pretend to know things you don't know. Your ignorance is obvious anyway, so you might as well be honest about it. People respect a person who acknowledges what they don't know and works to learn. Be wary of easy friendship. The frontier attracted more than its share of predators, people who survived by exploiting others. The man who buys you drinks and offers you a sure-thing investment. The woman who seems unusually interested in your background and your resources. The group that welcomes you too quickly, that asks too many questions, that seems too good to be true. Trust, but slowly. Watch how people treat others before you trust them with yourself. See how they act when they're angry, when they're drunk, when they don't know they're being observed. Character reveals itself over time, and patience can save your life. The right community can mean the difference between survival and death. The wrong community can speed you toward that death. Choose carefully. Your body will adapt, eventually. Muscles will harden. Calluses will form. You'll learn to eat the food and drink the water and endure the discomforts that seemed impossible at first. But your mind is another battle entirely. The frontier broke people psychologically. The isolation, the monotony, the constant stress of survival, the absence of everything familiar. It wore away its sanity like water wears away stone. Slowly, steadily, inevitably, you'll need to build a mental fortress. A place inside yourself where you can retreat when the world becomes too much. Find routines that anchor you. Small rituals that create structure in the chaos. Maybe you watch the sunrise every morning, taking 5 minutes to simply breathe and observe before the work begins. Maybe you count stars before you sleep. Maybe you recite poems or prayers or mathematical formulas. Anything that connects you to the person you were, the mind you're trying to preserve. Find purpose beyond survival. If all you're doing is trying not to die, death becomes almost welcome. It's the end of struggle, the cessation of pain. You need something to live for, not just something to live against. Maybe it's the hope of building something. Maybe it's helping others. Maybe it's simply bearing witness, surviving so that you can remember. Allow yourself to grieve. You've lost everything. Your home, your people, your entire world. That loss is real, and denying it will only make it fester. Find moments, private moments, safe moments, to feel what you've lost. To cry if you need to rage if you need to. And then, when the moment passes, to stand up and keep going. Watch for the warning signs. When the darkness becomes too comfortable. When the voice that says, "Why bother?" grows too loud. When the whiskey seems like the only friend you have. These are the moments that kill people, not with violence, but with surrender. Recognize them. Fight them. Ask for help if you can find it. The frontier was full of ghosts. People who were still breathing but had already given up. Their eyes were empty, their movements mechanical, their futures measured in months or less. You've seen them already, probably. The drunk who never leaves the saloon. The worker who takes stupid risks because he doesn't care what happens. Don't become one of them. Fight for your mind as hard as you fight for your body. Let's say you make it. Let's say you learn the skills, find the community, build the mental fortress. Let's say you survive 1 year, then 2, then 5. What does success look like on the frontier? It doesn't look like success in your world. Success might mean a small cabin that doesn't leak when it rains. For walls, a roof, a stove that keeps you warm through winter. Nothing else. No plumbing, no electricity, no comforts beyond the basic fact of shelter. Success might mean a steady job that pays enough to eat. Not enough to save, not enough to build wealth, but enough to survive from 1 month to the next. Security, measured not in retirement accounts, but in the reasonable expectation of eating tomorrow. Success might mean a few genuine relationships. People who know your name, who'd notice if you disappeared, who might help if you needed it. Not many. The frontier didn't allow for large social circles, but a few. Enough to make you feel human. Success might mean health. Still having all your limbs. Still having your teeth, or most of them. Still being able to work, to move, to function. In a world where bodies broke down so quickly, simply remaining functional was an achievement. And success might mean something less tangible. A sense of belonging. A feeling that this place, however brutal, is now your place. That you've earned your spot in this world, paid for it with sweat and blood and years of struggle. The wealthy ranchers, the mine owners, the successful merchants, those were the exceptions. The lottery winners of their era. For most people, success was smaller. A life that was sustainable. A death that came at a reasonable age, from natural causes, with family nearby. This is what you'd be fighting for. This modest, humble, hard-won existence. It's nothing like the life you had. It's nothing like the life you imagined. But it would be yours. And there's a dignity in that. A pride that comes from building something from nothing, from surviving what tried to kill you. Maybe that's enough. But let's be honest about what survival costs. Because nothing is free, least of all on the frontier. You'll lose your softness, and you might miss it. The gentleness that made you who you were. The sensitivity to beauty and pain and nuance. The frontier files those edges down. It makes you harder because hard things survive and soft things break. You'll lose your innocence. Not the innocence of childhood, but the innocence of someone who believed the world was basically safe, basically fair, basically comprehensible. You'll see things that can't be unseen. You'll learn truths about human nature, about your own nature, that you might have preferred not to know. You'll lose time, years that could have been spent differently, lived differently, in that other world you can never return to. The frontier extracts time like a vampire extracts blood, greedily and without mercy. Even if you survive, you'll be older in ways that have nothing to do with calendars. You might lose pieces of yourself, principles you thought were absolute until survival demanded you compromise them. Boundaries you swore you'd never cross until crossing them was the only option. The person who emerges on the other side of the frontier isn't the same person who entered it. Whether that's growth or corruption depends on your perspective. And you might lose people. The frontier took people with casual cruelty. Disease, accident, violence. Death was always close, always hungry. If you allow yourself to care about anyone, you accept the risk of losing them. Some people protected themselves by caring about no one. It kept them alive, but it made them something less than alive. This is the bargain. Survival in exchange for everything else. A life, but not the life you wanted. A future, but not the future you planned. Is it worth it? That's not a question I can answer for you. It's not a question anyone can answer until they're standing in the ruins of their old life, looking at the wilderness ahead, deciding whether to take the first step. Welcome back, weary soul. The night has deepened around you, the stars wheeling slowly overhead in their ancient patterns. You've been in this world for 2 days now, though it feels like a lifetime. Perhaps it has been a lifetime. The life of the person you used to be, now ending so that someone new can begin. We've talked about survival, about the immediate dangers and the skills you'd need and the price you'd pay. Now let's look further ahead. Let's imagine the months and years stretching out before you, the long road that leads either to death or to something like a life. Let your breathing slow. Let your body sink deeper into rest. And let me show you the future that might be waiting. Time moves strangely on the frontier. Days feel endless, each hour filled with labor, each task demanding your full attention. But then you look up and a month has passed. A season, a year. Your first year would be the hardest. Everything is new. Everything is difficult. Everything requires conscious effort. You'd make mistakes constantly, some embarrassing, some dangerous, some nearly fatal. You'd learn the hard way, because that's the only way the frontier teaches. But somewhere in that first year, something shifts. The tasks that exhausted you become merely tiring. The skills that seemed impossible become merely difficult. Your body adapts, your mind adapts, and one morning you wake up and realize that you're not just surviving anymore. You're living. The second year is different. You know the rhythms now. You know when to plant and when to harvest, when to prepare for winter and when to push through summer's heat. You know the people, who to trust, who to avoid, who to approach for help. The world that seemed incomprehensible has become comprehensible. By the third year, you might almost feel like you belong. Almost. There's still a gap between you and the people who were born here, raised here, shaped by this place from infancy. They have instincts you'll never develop, knowledge that lives in their bones. But the gap is smaller now. Manageable. 5 years in, you'd be a veteran. You'd have stories of your own, blizzards survived, dangers escaped, small victories accumulated. Newer arrivals might look to you for guidance, not knowing that you once stood where they stand, just as lost and just as afraid. This is the trajectory. This is what you'd be aiming for. Not triumph, not glory, but the slow accumulation of competence. The gradual transformation from outsider to inhabitant. The long, grinding process of earning your place. If you survive that long. The Wild West wasn't one place. It was 1,000 places, each with its own character, its own dangers, its own demands. Where you found yourself would shape everything about your survival. If you landed in the desert Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico, parts of Texas, you'd face the heat we talked about, but also the particular challenges of arid lands. Water was everything. Towns existed where water existed, and between them stretched vast expanses of nothing. The Apache and Comanche had mastered this landscape over centuries. You'd be starting from scratch. The wildlife was different here too. Gila monsters and coral snakes. Tarantulas and scorpions hiding in every shadow. The desert had beauty, stunning, stark, otherworldly beauty, but it had no patience for mistakes. If you landed in the Northern Territories, Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas, you'd face winters that made the cold we discussed seem mild. Temperatures that could freeze exposed flesh in minutes. Blizzards that buried entire towns, that trapped people in their homes for weeks. The growing season was short, the margin for error even shorter. But the North had its gifts too. Rich grasslands for cattle, streams full of fish, game that hadn't yet learned to fear humans. If you could survive the winters, the land would provide. If you landed on the Great Plains, Kansas, Nebraska, the Oklahoma Territory, you'd face the emptiness. Miles and miles of grass, unbroken by trees or hills or any landmark at all. People went mad on the plains, driven to insanity by the endless sameness, the howling wind, the isolation that seemed to press down from the vast, empty sky. But the plains could be farmed. The soil was rich once you broke through the dense root systems of the native grasses. Homesteaders poured onto the plains, building sod houses, breaking ground, planting the seeds of what would become the breadbasket of a nation. Each region demanded different skills, different strategies, different kinds of strength. The frontier wasn't one test, it was many tests, and where you landed determined which ones you'd have to pass. Let's say something happens to you. Something bad. Someone steals your horse. Someone cheats you out of your wages. Someone hurts you, or threatens you, or takes what's yours. What do? In your world, you'd call the police. You'd hire a lawyer. You'd trust in systems designed to protect you, to make things right, to punish wrongdoing. Here, those systems are fragile where they exist at all. Some towns had law enforcement. A sheriff, elected by the townspeople, often more politician than lawman. A marshal, appointed by the federal government, responsible for vast territories he couldn't possibly patrol. Deputies, when money existed to pay them, often chosen for their willingness to do violence rather than their commitment to justice. These men were not your friends. They were not servants of the people in any idealistic sense. They were enforcers, sometimes of law, sometimes of order, sometimes of the interests of whoever was paying them. A sheriff who received campaign contributions from the local rancher might not be interested in hearing your complaint against that rancher's men. And even when the law was honest, it was limited. The sheriff couldn't be everywhere. The crime often happened in places with no witnesses, no evidence, no way to prove what had occurred. Justice required proof, and proof was hard to come by in a land this big and this empty. So people took justice into their own hands. Vigilance committees formed, groups of citizens who decided to enforce order themselves. Sometimes they targeted genuine criminals. Sometimes they targeted people who were simply unpopular or different or in the way. The line between vigilance and mob rule was thin and often crossed. This is the world you're in. A world where wrongs often go unrighted. Where power matters more than principle. Where your safety depends not on abstract rights, but on concrete realities. Your reputation, your alliances, your ability to defend yourself. It's not fair. It was never fair. Fairness is another luxury the frontier couldn't afford. In all this darkness, let's talk about something brighter. Let's talk about love. People fell in love on the frontier. Of course they did. Loneliness was a constant companion, and the human heart seeks connection even in the harshest circumstances. Maybe especially in the harshest circumstances. But love here looked different than love in your world. Courtship was often brief. There wasn't time for the extended dance of modern dating, the months of getting to know each other, the careful negotiation of compatibility. People met, assessed each other quickly, and made decisions. A few weeks of acquaintance might lead to marriage. A few dances at a town social might be enough to know. This wasn't recklessness, it was practicality. Life was short and uncertain. Waiting for perfection meant potentially waiting forever. People chose partners who seemed decent, capable, compatible enough. Love, the deep romantic love of poetry and novels, might come later. Or it might not. Either way, life went on. Marriage on the frontier was partnership in the truest sense. Husband and wife worked side by side, depended on each other absolutely, shared burdens that would crush a single person. The romantic notion of marriage as emotional fulfillment was a luxury. Here, marriage was survival strategy. And yet, in the letters and diaries that survive from this era, there's love. Real love, deep love, love that sustained people through impossible hardships. Couples who built lives together, who raised children together, who grew old together against all odds. The love was different, less about passion, more about partnership, but it was no less real. If you found someone here, someone who saw past your strangeness, who accepted your mysterious past, who chose to build a life with you. That would be a gift beyond measure. Someone to share the work and the fear and the small joys. Someone to hold on to when the darkness pressed too close. It wouldn't be the love you knew before, but it might be love nonetheless. If love came, children might follow. And this is perhaps the hardest thing to contemplate. Childbirth on the frontier was dangerous. Desperately, terrifyingly dangerous. Without hospitals, without sterile equipment, without the ability to intervene when things went wrong, women died in childbirth with heartbreaking frequency. The men who loved them could only wait and pray and hope. If mother and child survived the birth, the dangers continued. Infant mortality was staggering by modern standards. Diseases that are minor inconveniences now, measles, whooping cough, simple infections, killed children routinely. Parents buried children and then had more children, knowing they might bury those too. The children who survived were shaped by this world from birth. They learned to work as soon as they could walk. By 5 or 6, they had chores, gathering eggs, feeding animals, carrying water. By 10, they were doing adult labor, putting in full days alongside their parents. Childhood, as you understand it, didn't exist. But there was also joy. Children playing in the dirt, making toys from sticks and scraps, inventing games that needed nothing but imagination. The laughter of children rang out across homesteads and town streets, a sound of hope in a world that offered little of it. And parents loved their children with the fierce, protective love that transcends all circumstances. They worked themselves to exhaustion to provide. They sacrificed everything for the chance that their children might have better lives. They buried the ones they lost and kept living, kept working, kept hoping. If you had children here, you'd know fear you've never imagined. Every fever, every cough, every accident would terrify you in ways your previous life never prepared you for. But you'd also know love you've never imagined. The love of a parent for a child born into a dangerous world, held close against the darkness, raised with desperate hope. Let's say you survive it all. The diseases and the violence, the hunger and the cold, the accidents and the heartbreaks. Let's say you live long enough to grow old on the frontier. What does that look like? Old came early here. A person of 40 might be worn out, used up, broken by decades of hard labor. 50 was elderly. 60 was remarkable. 70 was almost miraculous. The body accumulated damage that modern medicine would prevent or repair. Bad teeth, pulled one by one until none remained. Joints worn down from constant use. Backs bent from years of heavy lifting. Eyes dimmed, hearing faded, strength ebbed away. And the mind bore its own scars. Memories of those who didn't make it. The spouse buried on the hillside. The children lost to fever. The friends who rode away and never came back. A lifetime of loss, accumulated like sediment, weighing on the soul. But there was also wisdom. The old-timers knew things that couldn't be learned from books: how to read the weather, how to handle animals, how to survive what seemed unsurvivable. They were repositories of knowledge, respected for what they'd seen and done and endured. Some old people were cared for by their families, living out their days surrounded by children and grandchildren, useful as long as they could be useful, honored even when they couldn't. Others, those without family, faced harder ends. The frontier had no social safety net. If you couldn't work and had no one to care for you, charity was your only hope, and charity was scarce. Growing old here meant looking back at a life of struggle and finding meaning in it. Finding pride in what you'd built, what you'd survived, what you'd passed on. Finding peace, if you could, with all that you'd lost along the way. It wasn't the retirement you might have imagined. No golden years of leisure and travel. Just more work, until the work became impossible, and then rest at last. In the end, what would make it worthwhile? What would you remember, looking back across decades of struggle? Not the hardships, probably. Those would blur together, a general impression of difficulty rather than specific memories. The mind protects itself by forgetting pain. You'd remember the first time you succeeded at something. The first fire you built without help. The first time you stayed on a horse through a full gallop. The first time someone treated you not as a stranger, but as a neighbor. Small victories that proved you could do this, you could survive this, you could become someone who belonged. You'd remember the beauty. Sunsets that stopped you in your tracks. Storms that rolled across the plains like armies, terrifying and magnificent. The first snow of winter, covering the world in white silence. The land, for all its cruelty, was achingly beautiful, and that beauty would stay with you. You'd remember the connections. The mentor who taught you what you needed to know. The friend who stood by you when no one else would. The lover who chose you, who built a life with you, who made the struggle meaningful. These relationships, forged in hardship, would be stronger than any you'd known before. And you'd remember the moments of unexpected joy, laughter around a campfire, music on a summer evening, the pride of building something with your own hands, the simple pleasure of rest after honest work. Joy was rare on the frontier, but its rarity made it precious. These are the moments that would sustain you, the reasons you kept going when everything in you wanted to stop, the evidence that life, even this hard life, contains something worth living for. The night is deep now, the deepest part, but you can feel the promise of morning in the air. Not yet visible, not yet real, but coming, always coming. You've traveled far in your imagination tonight, through days and months and years, through struggles and losses and small triumphs, through a life that might have been, a life that might still be. Let yourself rest in this moment. The journey isn't over, it's barely begun, but you've seen enough to know what lies ahead. Enough to make your choice when the choice comes. Sleep now. Dream of sunsets and campfires and the faces of people who matter. When we return, we'll bring this story to its close. Welcome back, one last time. The night has nearly passed. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the first hints of gray are softening the darkness. The stars are beginning to fade. A new day is preparing to be born. We've traveled so far together, through the dangers and the hardships, through the long years and the small joys, through everything the frontier had to offer, both beautiful and brutal. Now it's time to reckon with the question we started with. Could you survive? Could you really, truly survive a day in the Wild West? Settle in. Let your body be heavy. Let your mind be still. And let me bring this story to its close. Could you survive a day in the Wild West? Probably. One day, you probably could. You'd be confused and frightened. You'd make mistakes. You'd be hungry and uncomfortable and utterly out of your depth. But one day, 24 hours, with some luck and some caution, you'd probably make it through. But that's not really the question, is it? The real question is whether you could survive the life. The weeks and months and years of relentless struggle. The grinding repetition of hardship. The slow accumulation of damage to body and mind and spirit. And the honest answer, the answer I've been building toward through all these hours, is probably not. Not because you're weak. You're not weak. You've survived things in your own life, faced challenges, overcome obstacles. You have strength you don't even know about, reserves you've never had to tap. But the frontier required a specific kind of strength. A strength that was built over years, forged in childhood, hardened through adolescence, tested constantly through adulthood. The people who thrived here, not just survived, but thrived, had been shaped by this world from their first breath. You haven't been shaped by this world. You've been shaped by a different one. And while that shaping gave you many gifts, education, perspective, knowledge, it didn't give you what you'd need here. This isn't failure. It's just truth. The same truth that would apply in reverse. Take a frontier survivor and drop them into your world, and they'd be just as lost. Just as unable to navigate the complexities of modern life. Just as doomed to struggle and probably fail. We are all products of our environments. And environments can't be swapped like costumes. So what did they have? These people who built lives on the frontier? What was the secret ingredient that you lack? It wasn't courage, though they had that. Courage can be summoned in moments of crisis. What they had was something deeper, endurance. The ability to face not one crisis but 1,000, day after day, year after year, without breaking. They had practical knowledge bred into their bones. They knew how things worked, not abstractly, but concretely. They could look at a horse and know if it was healthy. They could look at the sky and know if rain was coming. They could look at a piece of land and know if it would sustain life. This knowledge wasn't learned from books. It was absorbed through childhood, through watching and doing and failing and trying again. They had community, even when community was sparse. They knew how to build relationships quickly, how to trust appropriately, how to cooperate with people they'd just met. The social skills of the frontier were different from yours, but they were just as complex, just as essential. They had low expectations. This sounds like a criticism, but it isn't. They didn't expect life to be fair. They didn't expect comfort or safety or security. They hoped for these things, worked for these things, but they didn't expect them. When hardship came, it didn't shatter their worldview. It was just more of what they'd always known. And perhaps most importantly, they had no alternative. There was no going back to a comfortable life, because for most of them, no such life had ever existed. The frontier was hard, but for many, it was the best option available. That knowledge, that this is it, that there's nowhere else to go, creates a kind of determination that's hard to replicate. You have alternatives. Even in your imagination, even as you lie here listening to this story, part of you knows that you can return to your real life whenever you want. That knowledge is a comfort, but it's also a weakness. It's harder to commit fully to something when escape is always possible. Here's something strange to consider. The Wild West ended. It didn't last forever. It wasn't a permanent state of existence. It was a specific period in history, roughly 1865 to 1895, and then it was over. The frontier closed. The wilderness was tamed. The Wild West became just the West. What ended it? Many things, converging at once. The railroads connected everything. Towns that had been weeks of travel apart became days apart, then hours. Goods flowed in, isolation flowed out. The self-sufficiency that the frontier demanded became unnecessary when you could order supplies from a catalog and have them delivered by train. The population grew. Empty lands filled up. The sense of endless space, of unlimited possibility, gave way to boundaries and property lines and neighbors close enough to see. The frontier was, by definition, the edge of settlement. As settlement spread, the edge kept moving until it reached the ocean and had nowhere else to go. Law and order established themselves. Professional police forces replaced vigilantes. Courts replaced rough justice. The violence that had defined frontier life became rarer, then unusual, then shocking when it occurred. Technology changed everything. Barbed wire let ranchers fence the open range. Windmills pumped water where no water had been accessible before. Refrigerated rail cars meant cattle didn't have to be driven to market anymore. Each innovation chipped away at the old ways until the old ways were gone. By 1890, the Census Bureau declared that the frontier no longer existed as a defined line. By 1900, the Wild West was already becoming mythology, something to be romanticized in novels and shows, already fading from living memory into legend. The people who'd survived the frontier lived to see it disappear. They watched the world change around them, watched their hard-won skills become irrelevant, watched their children grow up in a world that no longer required what they'd sacrificed so much to learn. What did they feel? Pride, perhaps, that they'd helped build this new world. Nostalgia for the old one, despite its hardships. Maybe relief that their grandchildren would never know the struggles they'd known. Maybe sadness that something fierce and real and alive was passing from the earth. When we gained comfort, safety, convenience, when we left the frontier behind, what did we lose? We lost a certain kind of competence. The knowledge of how to do things with our hands, how to survive without systems, how to face the physical world directly. Most of us now are specialists, deeply skilled in narrow areas, helpless outside them. The generalist competence of the frontier, the ability to do a little of everything, to adapt to whatever came, has largely disappeared. We lost a certain relationship with nature. For frontier people, nature wasn't a place to visit on weekends. It was the medium they lived in, as constant and unavoidable as the air they breathed. They knew it intimately, respected its power, understood their place within it. We've separated ourselves from nature so thoroughly that we sometimes forget we're part of it at all. We lost a certain kind of community. When survival depended on neighbors, when the nearest help might be miles away, relationships were forged with intensity. We needed each other in ways we no longer do. Our communities now are often shallow, optional, easily abandoned. The frontier's communities were deep, essential, and lasting. We lost a certain tolerance for discomfort. The frontier people endured what we would consider intolerable: cold and heat, hunger and thirst, pain and exhaustion. They bore these as facts of life, not emergencies. We've become so accustomed to comfort that even minor discomforts feel like crises. And perhaps we lost a certain clarity of purpose. When your goal is survival, there's no ambiguity about what matters. You know exactly what to do and why you're doing it. Modern life offers 1,000 options, 1,000 paths, and the paralysis of too much choice. The frontier was brutal, but it was never confusing. I'm not romanticizing the frontier. I've spent hours telling you how terrible it was. I wouldn't choose to live there, and neither would you. But it's worth acknowledging what was lost alongside what was gained. Worth recognizing that our comfortable world has its own costs, its own deprivations, its own quiet diminishments of the human spirit. Let's imagine, one last time, that you made it. That against all odds, you survived. Not just a day, not just a year, but a life. Let's imagine you grew old on the frontier, sitting on that porch we pictured earlier, looking back across decades of struggle. Who would you be? You'd be harder. The softness we talked about at the beginning would be long gone, replaced by calluses and scars, and the bone-deep toughness that only comes from enduring what seems unendurable. You'd have done things you never imagined yourself capable of, both good and terrible. You'd know yourself in ways you can't know yourself now. You'd be simpler. The complexity of your modern mind, with its endless distractions and competing priorities and abstract anxieties, would have been burned away. Life would have become straightforward. Work, rest, eat, survive, protect what you love. There's a clarity in that simplicity, even if you can't quite imagine it from where you sit now. You'd be more grateful. Every comfort would mean something, because you'd remember when there were no comforts. A warm meal, a soft bed, a moment without pain. These things that you take for granted now would feel like miracles. You'd have learned gratitude the only way it can truly be learned, through deprivation. You'd be more connected to the land, which you'd know as intimately as your own body, to the people around you, bound by shared struggle and mutual dependence, to the rhythms of nature, the cycles of seasons, the pulse of life that modern existence has drowned out. You'd be more mortal. You'd have seen death so many times, faced it yourself so many times, that it would hold no mystery. You'd know that life is finite, precious, not to be wasted. You'd live differently because of that knowledge. More present, more aware, more alive. This person, this weathered, simplified, grateful, connected, mortal version of yourself, would look at who you are now with something between compassion and incomprehension. They'd see your struggles and find them strange. They'd see your comforts and find them miraculous. They'd recognize something of themselves in you, but only barely. You contain this person. Somewhere inside you, beneath all the layers of modern life, is the potential for this transformation. You'll probably never need to access it. You'll probably live your entire life without ever knowing what you're capable of. But it's there. That knowledge might be worth something. The sun is rising now. The real sun, in the real world, wherever you are. Or perhaps it's not. Perhaps it's the middle of the night and you're drifting towards sleep. Either way, we've reached the end. You couldn't survive a day in the Wild West. Not really. Not in any way that matters. The title of this story was honest, even if it took us hours to fully explain why. But here's what you can survive. Today. Your today. The life you actually have, with its own challenges, its own demands, its own quiet heroisms. You face struggles the frontier people couldn't imagine. The complexity of modern existence. The isolation of digital connection. The paralysis of infinite choice. The anxiety of a world that changes too fast to comprehend. These are real challenges, even if they don't involve gunfights and blizzards. And you face them with what you have. Not frontier toughness, but your own kind of toughness. Not pioneer skills, but skills suited to your world. Not a community bound by survival, but whatever community you've managed to build. This is enough. It has to be enough, because it's what you have. The frontier taught its people to work with what they had, to make do, to survive with whatever resources were available. That lesson, at least, translates across time. You have what you have. Start there. So rest now, traveler. You've earned it. You've journeyed through a world that's gone, walked in the footsteps of people who've faced challenges you can barely imagine. You've learned something, I hope, about history, about humanity, about yourself. The Wild West is over. It faded into legend more than a century ago, but its people were real. Their struggles were real. Their lives and deaths and loves and losses were as vivid and vital as yours. They would want you to remember them. Not the mythologized versions, the cowboys and outlaws of movies and novels, but the real people. The farmers who broke their backs tilling stubborn soil. The mothers who buried children and kept going. The laborers who built a nation with their hands. The ordinary, extraordinary people who faced each impossible day and somehow got through it. Remember them, and then let them go. The past is another country. You can visit, but you can't live there. Your life is here, now, in this moment that's uniquely yours. The frontier has nothing left to teach you that you haven't already learned. So close your eyes. Let the images fade, the dusty streets, the endless plains, the campfires and sunsets and starry skies. Let the sounds quiet, the horses and gunshots and fiddle music. Let it all drift away like morning mist. You're safe. You're home. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. Sleep now. Sleep deeply and well. And when you wake, carry something of this journey with you. A little more gratitude for what you have. A little more awareness of what you're capable of. A little more connection to the long chain of human beings who struggled and survived so that you could exist. That's enough. That's everything. Good night, traveler. The frontier is behind you now.